Edna Everage, and that is our show today. Leonie Freeman, Simon Pound, thank you very much. We're going to go out with a little bit of, you know it, love bites. Eh?
Absolutely. We'll have you singing next, Wallace.
Have a great weekend, both, eh? I'm Wallace Chapman. Thank you to my wonderful producer, Ayana, and see you 3:45 Monday.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoints on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, how smart is it slashing hundreds of jobs from Otago University? And why don't people want to be scarfies anymore? We talked to a uni rep and a student about the realities of 2-minute noodles and rooms without a window, let alone a view. Concerns grow for a New Zealand hostage in West Papua with violent clashes on the rise. The government ramps up its Ram Raid Relief Fund. What's really causing the telco tech shortage that's slowing down high-speed fibre? And are you behind the wheel right now, making it a long weekend? Well, you ain't alone, so the police would really appreciate it if you take extreme care. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The government is promising changes to the justice system to prevent young children being asked in court if they consented to sexual abuse. It will raise the penalty for sexual offences against children from 14 to 20 years, in line with the penalty for such offending against adults. Justice Minister Kiri Allen says at the moment, when the prosecutors want a 20-year penalty, children can be asked if they consented.
That means putting children into a position where they are having to say whether or not their unlawful sexual connection was enjoyable, whether they consented to it, whether it was appropriate. Children, as we've heard from the Chief Victims Advisor, as young as 6 years old.
Kiri Allen says victims of sexual assault will have greater legal protection with the law change. A University of Otago professor says a proposal to make several hundred staff redundant isn't surprising. The university revealed the plan yesterday, saying it's facing a $60 million budget shortfall that's worse off than it predicted. The professor, who asked not to be named, says it's been difficult to come to terms with the sheer scale of the issue.
It's been a long time coming. This is a crisis that's been brewing for about 10 to 12 years. We are facing the consequences of 2 consecutive governments relentlessly defunding universities.
The professor says the government needs to change its funding model, and all-staff forum will be held in about 6 weeks to discuss the next steps. Fire and Emergency has admitted it knew there was asbestos in its Auckland Central fire station, which had to be evacuated yesterday after dust generated during renovation work tested positive for the deadly substance. In response to questions from RNZ, the organisation says it carried out an asbestos survey in 2021 of nearly 500 of its properties built before the year 2000. Asbestos materials were found in 64% of them, and asbestos management plans were put in place for each site, including Auckland City Station. Deputy Chief Executive Sarah Sinclair says FENZ is unable to say if contractors were informed of the presence of asbestos or why firefighters were allowed to stay in the building while renovations were underway. The Race Relations Commissioner, Meng Foon, is in the gun after revelations he financially supported the Labour MP Kiri Allen in the lead-up to the 2020 election. Mr Foon was appointed to his role in 2019 by then Justice Minister Andrew Little and is expected to be independent of the government. A donations return shows that Mr Foon and his wife gave $1,500 to Ms Allen the following year. A company they partially owned also gave Ms Allen a rent subsidy worth more than $9,000. The ACT Party is calling for Mr Foon to be sacked and says it's not tenable for him to stay in a politically impartial role. A Canterbury runanga says Littleton Harbour will cease to provide food for its communities if more is not done to combat an invasive marine worm. Members of Mediterranean fanworms that can grow more than half a metre long have been increasing since 2020. John Cottier from Kaimahi for Nature and at Rāpaki Tangata Tiaki says if no action is taken, the consequences would be catastrophic. Mr Cottier says there can be up to 1,000 worms in a single square metre, and with no predator here, they suffocate native species like flounder. He says a clean hull policy in Whakaraupo Littleton Harbour would be a step in the right direction. Landmarks around Auckland will be glowing poppy red over the next few days. The Harbour Bridge and the War Memorial Museum will be lit up tonight to support the RSA's annual Poppy Day appeal. Other landmarks glowing red include the Sky Tower, the Light Path, which winds its way through the inner city, and Eden Park. The Warbirds Association will also stage flyovers across Auckland on Poppy Day and Anzac Day. It's 5:04. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck still wants to make the All Blacks World Cup squad despite securing his future as a rugby league player. Tuivasa-Sheck has made 3 appearances for the All Blacks in 3 years. He'll return to the Warriors next season but is grateful for the rugby experience.
It was exciting. It was a challenge going up against your David Havelis, your Jordan Barrett, your Ricos. Those players are superstars, and I was just pretty lucky to rub shoulders with them, and I still to this day want to continue there. I want to chase their environment.
Meanwhile, the unbeaten Chiefs can open up a gap at the top of the Super Rugby standings when they play the Fijian Drua tonight, with their closest rivals, the Brumbies and the Hurricanes, having byes this round. The Crusaders play the Rebels, and a bonus point win would see them leapfrog the Hurricanes into third spot. The Auckland Tuatara baseball franchise has gone into liquidation, citing financial pressure from COVID as behind their collapse. They entered the Australian national competition in 2018, but missed 2 seasons due to COVID travel restrictions. Club spokesperson Dale Budge won't say how much the franchise owes debtors, but says it does not affect the Tuatara basketball franchise, which is a separate entity. 5-time Olympic kayak champion Dame Lisa Carrington has won the opening race and the best of 3 against Amy Fisher to decide who'll compete at the World Champs in Germany later this year. And the Wellington Phoenix can guarantee themselves a place in the A-League football competition top six playoffs with a win over Sydney tonight. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, in between Oscar-nominated biopics and Broadway shows, Anthony McCartan has written a dystopian thriller about big tech surveillance. Could a transplant repair degenerating brains? Dr. Russell Swerdlow on the latest theory, and horologist Rebecca Struthers on the traditional art and science of watchmaking. Cork and Hillahay. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, funded through New Zealand. On air, Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next, but right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. In the north and west from Northland to Wellington, including the central high country, periods of rain with a few heavy falls. Thunderstorms possible tomorrow morning before easing to a few showers in the afternoon. For Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional showers, turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay rain at times from tonight, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nelson and Marlborough rain with possible heavy falls, becoming fine tomorrow, but isolated showers remain about the ranges. Bulla, Westland and Canterbury rain with heavy falls, easing to isolated showers overnight, then becoming fine tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, a few showers developing about Fiordland and the south coast this evening, then spreading inland for a time tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with rain developing late tomorrow morning. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Hour-long delays leaving Auckland on wet roads this evening. Let us know what the traffic is like where you are, 2101 on text, and we'll have updates throughout the program. But we begin in Dunedin, where University of Otago staff are grappling with news that several hundred could lose their jobs due to a $60 million budget shortfall. The university revealed yesterday it's in a worse position than predicted and it needs a new plan. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
A University of Otago professor who asked not to be named isn't surprised by the proposed cuts.
It's been a long time coming. This is a crisis that's been brewing for about 10 to 12 years. We are facing the consequences of 2 consecutive governments relentlessly defunding universities.
But it has been difficult to come to terms with the sheer scale of the issue.
There will not be a single staff member on campus who's not affected by this in a reasonably serious way, even whether people are made redundant or not. This will trigger a major work program of change.
He says the only true solution is for the government funding model to change. Student enrolments are down on what the university budgeted for. The university's acting Vice-Chancellor, Professor Helen Nicholson, says that's only part of the problem.
So we've got inflation, we've got regulatory environments, and all of them have gone quickly in the wrong way. So we've decided to be transparent with our staff yesterday about our untenable situation, and the hard work really starts now.
Solutions on the table include redundancies, asset sales, cuts to capital development and courses, and trying to attract more international students. But she says existing staff aren't being asked to take a pay cut.
So there's a whole range of things that we're doing at the same time, and we need to see how effective they all are, and then we can work out how many staff we may need to lose.
100 staff already accepted voluntary redundancy 2 years ago. Applications for the latest tranche open next week, with hopes anyone who accepts it will have left by the end of the year. Professor Nicholson says they will need to make staff cuts if not enough people apply, and those decisions will happen over the next 18 months. One woman who spoke on the condition of anonymity says her husband has been a senior lecturer for more than a decade, and she has several friends working at the university. She was shocked by the news.
We didn't realise how big a thing it was going to be. They were aware that there might be some more voluntary redundancies coming, but nothing like this level.
Now worry has set in. Her partner is the sole breadwinner and they have a young family.
I don't even want to think about forced staff cuts. That's horrible. But yeah, we were thinking about it last night. It's like, what the heck are we going to do if that comes our way? As he's the sole breadwinner, I'm thinking, well, where would I get work?
The workload of staff had massively increased due to COVID-19, with some of her friends dealing with double the amount they were pre-pandemic. It will mean more work for those who stay behind. She isn't sure how the university will continue to attract students if it cuts staff numbers and the courses on offer. She says any cuts will have a huge impact.
Dunedin is a university town, and if you cut those jobs, it's not just the university families that are going to be affected. I mean, we're talking about the whole ream of things. So, I won't be able to afford to take my kids ice skating or to do other lessons, and that's just not me. That we're talking about 60 million worth of staff families and all the ramifications economically throughout Dunedin.
Second-year law student Charlie says the proposed cuts are daunting.
It's daunting. It's kind of scary. I'm lucky I'm studying a degree that's kind of mainstream, so I'm like doubting anything will be cut. But in terms of just like professors being cut and sort of the voluntary redundancy, I think it's a bit ridiculous.
The university has assured students they will be able to finish the qualifications and papers they're currently enrolled in.
If I was studying more of a niche degree, I 100% would feel unstable, and whether if I have been reassured that I can finish my degree, is there like an expiry date on the staff that I'm interacting with, or am I getting kind of temporary staff that like maybe aren't as experts in their field as they should be?
A strategic plan detailing where cuts are needed is expected to go to the University Council next month. An all-staff forum will be held in about 6 weeks to discuss the next steps. Universities New Zealand Executive Director Chris Whelan joins us now. Kia ora, Chris. Did you see this coming?
Kia ora. Look, this has been something that's been happening across the university sector really for the last 3 or 4 years, partly COVID, but also partly long-term government funding settings.
Are any others that are in such dire trouble?
Look, all of them are dealing with challenges around basically making their books balance. It's certainly worse in some universities than others. So 8 universities around New Zealand, 5 have certainly seen a drop in student numbers this year. All are still rebuilding their international student pipelines, and all of this is on the back of really what's been a long-term decline in funding per student from the government.
Chris, is this the first domino to fall? Do you anticipate that there will be staff redundancies at other universities that are struggling?
Well, look, that's already happening. So there are already restructurings going on or planned at around 5 different universities. Some of them have been small-scale ongoing changes, but every university has been having to deal with things like drops in student numbers, international student numbers in particular, over the COVID period. And our biggest challenge is that 77% of our funding is controlled by government or comes from government, and this year that funding's only increased by 1.6% against obviously much higher inflation rates. So this has been happening for a good number of years now, with increases well below CPI. So all universities have had to make these decisions around, slowing down capital programs, cancelling building projects, and looking at staff numbers.
Okay, so government funding for the universities is an issue. When it comes to students, why don't domestic students want to go to university at the same rates that they used to?
Well, they do. What we're seeing, however, is a couple of factors like demographic change. There are fewer 17-year-olds coming out of school at the moment than was the case, say, 5 or 6 years ago. And those numbers will increase again. In fact, we'll start seeing an increase in 2026. But we're also seeing students that, going overseas to do their studies, which is what used to happen pre-COVID. So about 2,000 students every year would leave school, go to Australia, the UK, or the US. And those students, of course, didn't go overseas during COVID, but they started going overseas again this year.
Yeah, but that begs the question of how universities are getting their forecasting so wrong then, when they know we're out of COVID and presumably things will start to equalise back to how they were before COVID. Are there students, and Otago University has said that there are students who are not getting, fewer students getting university entrance, more being attracted by the job market. And I'm wondering if there is a shift in thinking about the value of a general degree.
We're not seeing that at any scale. But on the flip side, our problem is, of course, it's very hard to talk to the students that don't turn up. we can survey and talk to the students that enrol, but often if we don't know that a student, was interested and didn't come, it's very hard for us to go and find them, to talk to them and ask what's going on. What we do know is we're seeing trends like, and we assume it's cost of living. Some of our, say, mature part-time students either deferring study, so they're not continuing, or where they might have done, say, 2 papers a semester, they've dropped back to just 1 paper. And we're guessing a lot of that is just cost of living.
How off-putting has the COVID experience been in terms of retaining students? Some students might have done a year or 2 years, and then after COVID, they haven't bothered coming back.
It's been a factor, but it's been particularly a factor for school students whose studies were significantly disrupted by close downs. And, we know that there are a lot more students trying to get to university who perhaps are not as academically prepared as they might have been pre-COVID. And so universities are having to put a lot more support into, getting these students into university and making sure they're properly supported through first year.
So, Chris, with potentially several hundred staff going from Otago University, what capacity is there for redeployment around other institutions around the country?
Well, that's the question, because, there are similar pressures at most other universities. It's a university sector, its greatest asset is its people, for teaching and research. The problem is that 60% of the cost of universities is people as well. And, when you have to balance the books, unfortunately, people are one line you have to look at pretty closely. Every university wants to retain good people because, we know that the numbers will come back eventually. So it's about keeping as many as possible, losing as few as possible.
What happens to that kind of institutional knowledge and experience and the way our universities are ranked and viewed if you lose those staff on a more permanent basis, not just from Otago, that they go away somewhere else?
And that's something we're very worried about. All 8 of our universities are world ranked, all in the top 500 in the world. That's because we've been able to hold on to fantastic people over a long period of time. We have the best graduate employment rates, the lowest graduate underemployment rates of any country we know of. And again, that's people. So, yeah, it's a big worry, about what exactly our system's going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time. If we have to make these short to middle term decisions, what it's going to mean for our long term.
Has Otago got assets it can sell?
I can't answer that. That's really a question for Otago.
Okay.
But every university has a whole range of choices, everything from borrowing, selling, slowing down expenditure, things like voluntary redundancies as is being talked about, and all universities are exploring all of those options.
I understand the difficulties that Otago has faced and that they've articulated, but $60 million isn't a hole, it's an absolute gaping crater. So do you think there's some mismanagement here, Chris?
Having sat alongside the chief financial officers of the 8 universities regularly over the last few years, I know that every chief financial officer worth their salt runs a whole range of scenarios. They have to take university councils, the governing bodies, basically through those scenarios, and those councils have to, with advice from their senior leadership teams, make some sensible calls around what do the likely futures look like. That's very clearly what the University of Otago has worked through, and that's the conclusion they've come to based on the numbers they've got.
Thanks for joining us, Chris. That's Chris Whelan, who's Universities New Zealand Executive Director there. 19 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Despite the government doubling its support for retail crime, some businesses say the process is flawed. Today, the government announced a $9 million boost to their crime prevention fund, bringing the total investment to $15 million. Now, that gives businesses the opportunity to apply for funding for fog cannons, bollards and security systems if they've been ram-raided or burgled. But as Louise Tanuth reports, despite being targeted multiple times, some businesses say they haven't been able to access support.
Last March, this liquor store owner in Auckland was ram-raided, leaving their roller door badly damaged with wooden boards for security until their new replacement arrived. But that left them exposed and susceptible to other break-ins. Sure enough, just a few weeks later, they had 2 more break-ins.
19th of April and 21st of April, we've been breaking twice again.
In May, the government announced the first ram raid relief fund for businesses. In August, the liquor store finally installed 6 bollards after a lengthy wait, footing the $6,000 bill themselves. Because the business is for sale, the owner says they were denied government compensation.
But I think that is quite funny, because it doesn't matter I sell my business or not. Even if the new owner coming, they still got to face the same problem. I'm not happy. I'm quite disappointed,
That's the fog cannons. I've always had a fog cannon. I've had that big one for the past 3 years. So that was the small fog cannon that I got from the government support. And there's an alarm system. I've always had alarm system also. But yeah, so I think they've just upgraded it.
At Sandringham Superette, Satish Vatsa was ram-raided in April last year and has also been robbed in recent years. So he already had a number of security measures in place before the government's Ram Raid Protection Fund was announced in May last year. But he did upgrade his alarm system and get an extra fog cannon with the government support, though he says that took several months. He welcomes the government's funding boost to increase security, but says it speaks to a growing safety problem for dairy owners that takes a huge mental toll.
I've seen a lot of dairies out South Auckland, and there's a dairy up the road also near the lights. They've got iron doors and everything, so that's not a good feeling. Something like this happens, it's always there at the back of your head, but it takes a couple of months to get things out of the head.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins today acknowledging they needed to do more to help businesses feel safe, with demand still high for support.
Those small businesses, I should say, that have been the victims of retail crime, potentially something as traumatic as a ram raid, it can have a long and lasting consequence. And we've got people who don't feel safe in their own businesses. And in some cases, it's not just their business, it's their home as well.
But he was adamant everything was being done to crack down on crime, with last year's peak in ram raids now trending down.
One ram raid is a ram raid too many as far as I'm concerned, so we've just got to keep going. But I think that the trend numbers are pointing in the right direction now. We are making good progress.
Of the stores accessing the support, 2,383 interventions have been approved and just under half had been completed.
That report from Louise Tenuth. It's 22 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Why don't you think as many young people are going to university? Good or bad thing? 2101 on text. A lot of people are making a long weekend out of Anzac Day. What is it like on the roads near you? We would love to know. If it's safe to get in touch, please give us a bit of a sit rep. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Anei Marama, mina pita pita kōrero.
Thank you, Lisa. Universities New Zealand Executive Director Chris Whelan has told Checkpoint the crisis in the university sector has been brewing for 3 to 4 years. Mr Whelan says it was partly a result of COVID and partly a result of government funding. The University of Otago in Dunedin is proposing to make several hundred staff redundant amid a $60 million budget shortfall. The government is promising to give victims of sexual assault more rights and support and prevent litigation abuse in the family court. Justice Minister Kiri Allen says in one case, a person brought more than 100 applications against their ex-partner over 7 years. The changes will also raise the penalty for sexual offences against children from 14 to 20 years and stop young children being asked in court if they consented to abuse. Customs seized a whopping 50 kilograms of cocaine from a freighter which docked in Tauranga this morning. The drugs had travelled from Panama and were bound for Sydney. Police in the US state of North Carolina have arrested a man accused of shooting a 6-year-old girl and her father after their basketball rolled into his garden. Police say 24-year-old Robert Louis Singletree gave himself up in Florida. And Auckland's Harbour Bridge and War Memorial Museum are among the landmarks lighting up tonight for the RSA's annual Poppy Day appeal. It's 24 minutes past 5.
Ngā mihi. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck says he was nervous to tell the world he was switching back to rugby league next season and calling time on his rugby experiment. The code-hopping star has spent 3 years playing with the Blues in Super Rugby and made 3 appearances for the All Blacks. From next year, he will return to the NRL with the Warriors, a club he has played for 111 times. As he winds down his rugby career, he's realistic about where he fits in.
I'm pretty happy with the way we're going to rugby. I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not headlining as a rugby player, but still happy with the time that I've had here so far. But there's still a few more months of me as a rugby player, so I'm going to still be chasing my best.
We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid now. Felicity, why did Tuivasa-Sheck make this code switch announcement right now?
There's been a bit of speculation around what his future holds with his New Zealand rugby contract ending at the end of this year. There was always the word, wouldn't he go back to rugby league? And so a lot of that has been around transparency. He said today that he didn't want to lie to his Blues teammates about what his future held, because these NRL contracts don't sort of come around overnight. There's obviously been some toing and froing in the background. He's obviously known for a little while that this is what he's wanted to do. So he's chosen now. He respects that there are 2 clubs in play here. So this is the Warriors, who have had a great start to the NRL season, and the Blues, who are trying to push for the playoffs in the Super Rugby Pacific. He was quite mindful of being in that place and realising, I think, that as a player like himself, he's a bit of a favourite son over at the Warriors, so there would be a lot of happy fans around. So today he was sort of really at Blues headquarters speaking to the media and saying, I'm still a Blues man until the end of 2023. He was very reluctant to talk about anything to do with rugby league, didn't really want to get into the details around how he got that 3-year rugby league deal. He didn't want to get into who he'd spoken to or anything like that. He was saying that, injuries have had an impact on his rugby time. So this, for him, he had offers from Japan and overseas to continue rugby at the end of this, and he's still got some rugby aspirations, wants to get a title with the Blues and still wants to maybe get into that All Blacks Rugby World Cup squad, which going to Rugby World Cup was part of, I think, the reason of why he came to rugby to start with. So he's saying as well that the decision came down to staying in New Zealand. His family's here. He's got 3 young kids. He wants them to grow up with their cousins in Auckland. He's a very proud Aucklander, so wants to stay here. And that's also why he didn't look at any other NRL clubs with making his decision when he went back to league.
Hey, the Auckland Tuatara baseball club, this is, they haven't been around that long, so they've been put into liquidation. What's gone wrong?
Oh, exactly. So they came into the Australian Baseball League in 2018. They played one season, had a couple of seasons off out of the league due to COVID. So that was, again, one of these clubs that couldn't go across to actually play these games. So it's a lot of COVID, and they're also blaming the wet Auckland summer for cancelling some of their games. So the games that they would have had over here, Australian teams came over, played a weekend of games here. So with these, if you had a wet weekend, these games weren't played, crowds weren't showing up, and they weren't getting any revenue. So that's what they're saying is behind the financial strain that this put on the club. Their club spokesman, Dal Budge, wouldn't actually tell us how much the club owed debtors, but he did say that it was an insurmountable amount. So that is a big blow, though, for New Zealand's first professional baseball club. And I do have to say that they are also have a basketball side. So the Tuatara basketball side play in the NBL. This doesn't affect them. So they say that this is under separate ownership and that they have all players, coaches and staff are being paid. So that's not anything to do with what's happening with the baseball. The basketball side will continue, but that's also what Budge said was an interesting point between the two sports and where they sat in New Zealand, that the basketball had a bit more popularity and support, and that was kind of what they'd wanted to achieve with the baseball side, was to get a foothold in the New Zealand market, but obviously haven't been able to achieve that.
Thank you, Felicity. That's Felicity Reid there with our sports news. A lack of investment and training has left Aotearoa wildly short of telco technicians and a long queue of people waiting even longer to get high-speed fibre installed, according to a union. Chorus, which is the country's main provider of telecommunications infrastructure, has been forced to apologise for wait times, in some cases blowing out to 10 weeks, when its target time for installations is 15 days. It's blaming a shortage of about 200 techs, saying many overseas workers returned to their home countries when the COVID border closures lifted. Air2 union organiser Joe Gallagher joins us now. Kia ora, Joe. Is it that simple? People have gone home to their home countries after the borders opened, after COVID?
No, thank you, Lisa. No, I don't think it's that simple. I think COVID is a convenient argument. I mean, this industry has been fragmented for many years, and I don't think we have a cohesive training strategy to train local workers. And what we've seen over COVID is when you close the border, that reliance on overseas labour is not there. We can't get them, and then we're exposed.
So we have, in this industry, you believe, relied too heavily on overseas workers?
Absolutely. I mean, but we've seen it across industries, but particularly in this industry. And we went to the dependent contractor model 10 years ago. That further exacerbated the problem because no one's got the money nor the resources to be able to train people locally, and I really think it takes a collective response around this training to, so that we don't end up in these situations.
How long does it take you to train to be a telecom tech, and who should be subsidising that?
Look, I think it takes about a couple of years. You can be qualified, but I think it has to be a collective response. I think it's a government. The government has to be involved. I think the companies and the contractors have to be involved, and the training institutes have to be involved. We really need a collective response. We do not have a dedicated what I call trade training schools in New Zealand. You see them in Australia, where they bring these guys in and they train them, and then they farm them out to the contracting companies. And we don't have that in New Zealand, and it's really been laid bare regarding COVID.
Do we need to set one up? Is that what you're saying, Joe?
Oh, look, I think absolutely. I think, as we're seeing the reorganisation of our tertiary training organisations into this big polytech, I think we have an opportunity as a country to set up a trade training school, whether it's Auckland, Christchurch or Wellington, and bring them in. We need workers across infrastructure, power, telecommunications, and if the cyclone has taught us anything, we have a huge reliance on communication. And so power and telecommunications are actually critical industries where we should be doing everything to train locally.
It's interesting we're having this conversation today, Joe, because I've just been talking about the universities and the drop in the number of high school leavers that are signing up to go to university and get a degree. Have we undervalued trades like this one that we're talking about?
Yeah, look, absolutely. My daughter's going to university, but actually I think we have a huge opportunity in this country. A lot of children between 14 and 16, which I believe are the target audience, we should be talking to them, engaging with them and showing them that you can actually get a trade without getting a huge debt, which gives you a passport to the world. And I don't think we're doing enough in this space, and we're letting these kids fall through the cracks. I mean, we have an opportunity to really get these kids, and so they won't be left with $60,000 to $100,000 worth of debt. They will get a trade, they will have a good job, and they can work or they can travel overseas. You know what I mean? This is a real opportunity for us to engage with our youth.
There is an issue here, and it came up a few years ago, which was about contractors basically being ripped off and paid, in some cases, below the minimum wage when it came to these technicians who were doing installations. What is the pay like? What happens if you go out of a big city? How do these contracts work?
Look, there are a couple of big players. You've got Downers, and we've got a collective agreement with them, and in that agreement, that we've got what we call a retainer, so no one gets less than $57,750. But on average, those guys are earning between $70,000 and $85,000 a year, and so. The average wage is about between $31 and $35 an hour, and the other big player is UCG. And I think with what happened in Auckland a few years ago with all that exploitation, I think Chorus has recognised that model is not necessarily working, so they are starting to reintroduce wages back into the sector to try and eradicate that below the minimum wage pay.
So if you're out of one of the main areas, Joe, are workers who are in this area, are some of them still being exploited, paid for doing, because part of it was they were paid for doing sort of the finishing off of the job, and lower paid workers were brought in to do other components of it. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, look, I think it's less of a problem now that Chorus has repositioned the market. So Downers basically controls from the Bombays right down through the rest of New Zealand and even into the smaller places. But, there was a time when they were starting to what I call sort of fragment the job, so sort of getting someone to dig the hole, getting someone else to come in and just clip the wires up, and then that way they could get around and pay a lower rate. And so people, and we're seeing it now too with a hot labour market, no one's going to work for minimum wage anymore, right? The labour market is really hot, particularly in the big centres, but even now post-cyclone, it's going to put further pressure on our labour market. So getting away with being a bottom feeder employer is just not going to work, and you're just not going to get the workers.
Interesting to talk to you, Joe. Thanks for joining us. That's Air 2 Union organiser Joe Gallagher there. It is 25 minutes to 6. Interested in your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text. Should we be encouraging more of our young people to go into trades? We've got shortages. One company alone, 200 short of techs, and we have more school leavers not going to university to get degrees. Where is the balance there? 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Kia amo tōne mai. Stay with us. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltze, who joins me in the studio. Okay, KiwiSaver. Workers getting their employer's KiwiSaver contribution as part of their overall wage. You might be getting a little bit shortchanged. How does that work?
Well, so the Retirement Commission has done some research on this and found that of the employers that they surveyed, about 45% use this model where they include the KiwiSaver contribution as part of your salary package. That's not the way the program was designed. And it can be used in that way as long as the employee agrees, but what the Retirement Commission thinks is that that's not always the case, that people probably aren't aware of that. And what it does is it removes the incentive to save. Because if the pension or the KiwiSaver portion which your employer is contributing is included in your salary, if you say, yeah, I want it to go into my KiwiSaver, that's just less money in your hand. In the end of the day, you're just not going to get that as pay. That's money that you will get after you retire at 65 years of age. You also miss out on the contribution of saving for your retirement. So the thing is, the Retirement Commission is concerned that it's putting people off from saving for their retirement. There's no incentive. Why not just keep the money your employer is giving you, then put it into a savings plan? And the statistics suggest that might be the case. So they did some number crunching, and they said that 96% of the population are in members of KiwiSaver, the working population. 39% of those people don't contribute. Some of them it's because they're, on leave for whatever reasons, maybe they're students or what have you. But a third of those people, there's no idea of why they're not contributing. That's a lot of people that have no explanation for not contributing to KiwiSaver. In the end, that is going to eventually come home to roost, so to speak. When you get to 65 and you're just getting maybe just a super payment, it's not going to be enough to live on. You need more, and you need to save for your retirement. So I think the Retirement Commission is concerned that employers are using this way of including it to save themselves money. In fact, in the survey, 21% admitted it was cheaper for their business.
Of course.
Yeah, well, but they're not helping themselves because we're going to have to pay one way or another. You don't want people being poor in their retirement. And so the idea of creating a savings for your retirement is so important. You need to do that. And so the retirement, we'll see what happens with this. I don't think it's the end of this story.
And a warning for businesses employing immigrants via the accredited work visa scheme. What is the issue, Nona?
Okay, so an immigration lawyer has raised this as an issue. So the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has said that they're going to conduct an audit of these accredited employers. And so what the accreditation program was, it was sort of like, I don't want to say it's a tick box program, but it was sort of like a trust program. So if you were a business, you could be trusted to tell immigration that these were, your criteria. You needed these people to hire from overseas, and you could just basically get the people you needed. Now, after this program has been announced, they're going to audit to see whether or not people were truthful, whether they did the work that they were required to do to get the accreditation. And this immigration lawyer is concerned that a lot of people haven't done that work because it was a lot of work, and there's a lot of small businesses and people who just, would have used it to get the staff they needed, whether it's whatever kind of business. And the penalty for failing to comply is a loss of that accreditation, which means you won't be able to hire staff overseas anymore. That's a problem because that could be your whole business that goes down the toilet. So not a good thing.
One to keep watching. Let's do a quick sprint around the market.
Okay, so we did really well compared with the rest of the region. We ended up 0.4%. That was a gain of 48 points on the NZX Top 50 Index to 11,928. One thing that was interesting today was that Synlait Milk was in a trading halt. We haven't heard why, but we will find out soon. And the dollar, steady. No change really from yesterday. 61.6 US cents, 92.5 Australian, 49.5 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. Fire and Emergency admits it's known of asbestos in its Auckland Central Fire Station since 2021. The building was evacuated yesterday after dust from renovation works tested positive. FEN's Deputy Chief Executive Sarah Sinclair was unable to tell RNZ if contractors were told about the substance or why firefighters were allowed to stay in the building during the work. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says 7 New Zealanders are registered with the government as being in Sudan, where fighting between forces commanded by 2 previously allied leaders has left hundreds dead and thousands injured. The ACT Party is calling for Race Relations Commissioner Meng Foon to be sacked after revelations he financially supported the Labour MP Kiri Allen in the lead-up to the 2020 election. His reappointment to the politically impartial role is in the hands of Justice Minister Ms Allen, to whom he gave $1,500 in 2020 and also a rent subsidy worth more than $9,000. ACT says it's not tenable for Mr Foon to stay on. Women's Refuge says government plans to give courts greater powers to stop abusers from using litigation to harass victims is a good step step in the right direction. Women's Refuge's Chief Executive Ange Jury says abusers dragging out court processes stops their victims from making a new life. And the Royal New Zealand Navy's newest and largest ship, HMNZS Aotearoa, sailed into its ceremonial home port at New Plymouth today. Its core crew of 64 will be taking part in Anzac Day ceremonies around Taranaki. We'll have more news at 6.
Marama. Returning to our top story, Otago University is facing the prospect of hundreds of staff redundancies in the face of a $60 million budget shortfall. Overall, student numbers are down on what the university forecast, but specifically it's domestic enrolments that have taken a hit. The uni puts it down to the rising cost of study, a buoyant job market coaxing young people straight to work, and a drop in the number of students returning after COVID. So what are the financial realities of Otago student life? Well, Kaya Kahurangi Jamison is in her second year of a BA and science degree, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Kaya.
Kia ora, how are you going?
I'm really well. What do you think of the news of the cuts at Otago Uni?
I mean, obviously the cuts are not ideal, and I think all the students feel terribly for any staff who feel like they'll be at risk of being laid off. And I think we're also worried that this will have a domino effect that will affect how we can study. More staff means more attention for each student, and that's an awesome thing to have, and any decline in that doesn't look great for current students or future students.
Yeah, so one of the things that they think is putting people off coming to university is the cost of living. How hard do you reckon it is to make ends meet as a student where you are?
Yeah, I think it totally depends. You know, a lot of students take out a student loan, which is great that we have that option in Aotearoa, but obviously it puts them in debt, and that's not a great place to be as a student. I know friends who are on the student loan who, at the end of the week, after paying for food, power and rent, still only have 13 cents left in their bank account. So if you're on a student loan, it's still pretty tough. And if you're somebody like me who has decided to work throughout university and try not to get into debt, then that puts you in a position of having to work 20 hours a week just to make ends meet, 30 if you want to be able to indulge in some of the fun parts of being a student.
So how many hours do you work and what do you do?
Lately I've been working around 30 hours a week. I work 20 hours at the Students Association down here as the Welfare and Equity Representative, and I do some freelance filmmaking 10 hours a week. I also have 2 casual jobs for when I need to earn a bit more money.
That's a lot on your plate. How much does your rent cost? What do you spend on food? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, no worries. My rent personally costs about $170 a week. Some of the girls in my flat pay $180. One of them pays $150. And that's for a flat that's, it's a student flat. It's not a mansion. I spend about $50 a week on food, but I really try to spend as little as I can to buy in bulk and that sort of thing.
So I'm curious here. Different prices for the rooms in the same flat. What's the deal?
Mm-hmm.
What makes one room $20 more? What's the luxury attached to that?
Yep, one of the rooms in our flat we think was converted from an old living room, so it's got a big bay window. It's nice and roomy. One of the rooms only has a skylight. It doesn't even have a window on the wall. So obviously that's the room that has the lowest rent.
Right. So you pay for a window. You pay extra for a window.
Yeah, and a bigger bedroom with a lot more space.
Yeah, okay. So you are 2 years into what is a 4-year course, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you reckon you'll get through it in 4 years, given all the work you're doing?
I don't think so. I've been taking 3 papers this semester because I just simply wouldn't have time to fit a 4th one in. Even if I did have time to fit a 4th one, I wouldn't be able to hand in work that is of the calibre that I feel comfortable submitting. So that makes a 4-year degree more like 4.5, possibly 5 years when you're having to work at the same time.
Do you think it's worth it, Kaya? Are you convinced that you're going to get the type of job that you want and earn the type of money you want, having put yourself through this and spent all the money it costs to get this degree?
I think, personally, the kind of job I want isn't necessarily one that you need to go to university for, but it's not a very exciting perspective for a lot of 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds coming out of high school having to look at going straight into the workforce. it's really nice to be able to go to university and meet like-minded people and have a great experience, but it's a really painful reality that costs a lot of money, and you do need to either decide to work a job or two or take out a student loan and put yourself in debt. So it's definitely a conflicting thing to think about.
Do you have friends who have decided not to go to uni, instead to do trades or other types of jobs straight out of school because they can get the money and fast?
Yeah, I do have a lot of friends like that. The conversations I've had with them recently, they've talked about feeling like they're missing out a little bit on what a lot of adults refer to in hindsight as the best years of their life, because they're, 18 years old and they're already working 9-to-5 jobs.
Yeah, there's a lot of years to work, Kaya, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Hey, COVID disruptions, because you're obviously second year, as we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So did all the kerfuffle with COVID and lectures being remote and all of that, did any of that make you question whether you wanted to return to the university campus?
Well, I think an important part of that statement is return to the university campus. For the first half of my first year, we didn't have any lectures in person. And so actually being able to come into campus this year has been amazing, and it's actually one of the things that's made me more inclined to want to stay at university.
Kaya, what would you ultimately want to do when you leave? What's your dream job?
My dream job is documentary filmmaking, hopefully something underwater, hopefully something in nature.
We will look for your credit in film. I imagine that it will be there very soon. Thank you for joining us. That is Kaya Kahurangi Jamison, who is in the second year of her degree at Otago University and working flippin' hard to make ends meet and get good grades. 12 minutes to 6, Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Reports of heavy traffic this evening, particularly in Auckland. Police are expecting people to maximise Anzac Day and take a long weekend. Meeting the roads could be chocker, with people returning from school holidays too. Last year, 12 people died on the roads over Anzac weekend, and it was a horror start to this week with, I think it was 7 deaths on the road. National Road Policing Centre Director Superintendent Steve Greeley is appealing to drivers to make smart decisions this weekend.
It's not a traditional long weekend, but we're treating it like any situation where we know there's going to be more people on our roads. So just like those traditional long weekends, we do get a lot of people going on holidays, and obviously Anzac Day this year is on a Tuesday, and we know a lot of people will take that Monday off to get a 4-day weekend, which makes perfect sense.
So what does that mean for you in terms of resources, patrols, policing?
Yeah, it'll be exactly the way we treat any long weekend. We will have more people out there being as visible as they can and trying to mix up the locations and times that we're actually patrolling out there, just to make sure that people understand that actually we're not predictable. There is a very good chance that if we make a bad decision on the road as a driver, then it's quite possible there will be a police officer there to detect it and deal with it. So we want people, obviously, to do the right stuff rather than have to be enforced.
In saying that, are you operating at a zero tolerance in terms of speed?
Oh, look, we never have a zero tolerance on speed, but what we do recognise is that speed does kill a lot of people. In fact, it's the greatest cause of death and serious injury in New Zealand and probably around the world. And I mean that, and not just in terms of the posted speed limit, but also for the conditions. And I think today we're going to get quite a bit of rain down the Wellington area, but and rain throughout the weekend. In patches, so the weather does vary. We want people to drive at a speed that is cognizant of the environmental and the weather conditions, not just the posted speed limit.
Yeah, and I suppose we've still got, a few dodgy roads after the bad weather at the start of the year. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, and that's part of the environmental conditions. The good people over on our east coast have suffered horrendously in recent times with Cyclone Gabrielle. And there's still a lot of infrastructure that's being worked on by the authorities there. So if the roads are not in great condition, that means we have to further adjust our speed and keep our eyes on the road and do the right things. It becomes even more important.
Just an observation. I note that over the Easter long weekend, we had a very low death toll on the roads. And then almost immediately after that official holiday period ended, there was a number of fatal crashes. It's like people dropped their guard unless you tell them explicitly this is a high-risk period. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good observation. And we were the same, we had 5 people die in the Easter period terribly last year. And then 12 people died in the Anzac, and that blew us away. You're right. It's very hard to understand exactly why that happened. But what we do know is that there are 4 things that contribute to either causing a crash or determining survivability rates once a crash has happened. And they're really basic stuff you learn when you're doing your driver license testing sort of stuff. And it's like put your seatbelt on. We have a lot of people who lose their lives or are seriously injured because they just didn't have the belt on for whatever reason. There's no excuse there. Impairment, when you think about alcohol or drugs or fatigue's a big one on a holiday period. That can cause a lot more danger to people on the roads. And but then, of course, distraction, predominantly cell phones, but anything else that might take your eyes off the road is a bad thing. And as we've just talked about, speed. So those 4 things: restraints, impairment, distraction, and speed. And police, we refer to those as RIDs. It's really easy. But it's amazing how many people still don't get that message. So, look, going back to your original point around Anzac and what happened, those 4 things are likely to have played a significant part of it. But there are all sorts of other things that can cause crashes as well.
I'm interested, cost of living is tracking pretty high, and I'm wondering if you are seeing any issues with warrants and regos and roadworthy vehicles.
Yeah, look, the focus of police to try to do everything we can to bring down the number of deaths and serious injuries in this country relates to those RIDs things. That's predominantly what we do. It's not all we do. Where we come across a vehicle that is quite obviously not warranted, or even in a condition where it could be warranted, we do take action, but it's not our primary focus. I guess that's incumbent on everybody who's either driving a car or getting into one, that actually you want to make sure that vehicle is capable of being driven safely. Why would you hop into something that was going to put you at greater risk of losing your life? I have no idea.
And that is Superintendent Steve Greeley. So do be careful out there on the roads this evening. And if you're able to, passenger in the car, text us on 2101 to let us know what it's like on the roads. There are renewed concerns for the safety of New Zealand hostage Philip Mertens in West Papua as fighting between Indonesian security forces and his captors, the West Papua Liberation Army, intensify. New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has received reports of the increased military confrontations and is again calling on the Papuan separatist group to release Mr Mertens, condemning the use of hostages to make a political point. Koroi Hawkins has more.
This unverified footage of Indonesian soldiers under heavy fire emerged over social media on Saturday, shortly after reports of a major confrontation between Indonesian military forces and the West Papua Liberation Army fighters holding Philip Mertens hostage in Dugama, Highlands, Papua. New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he's aware of the reports of increased military activity. When pressed on whether Philip Mertens was still alive, this is what he had to say.
That is my understanding. Obviously, reluctant to share too much in the way of details, whilst that's a very live situation on the ground.
The rebels claim the 36-member Indonesian military patrol had been sweeping villages in Dugama on Saturday in search of Mr. Mertens, and that theirs was a retaliatory attack. They claim to have killed over a dozen Indonesian soldiers and taken 9 captives, with the rest of the Indonesian soldiers escaping into the jungle. The Indonesian military command has been downplaying their losses. Speaking in Papua on Wednesday, Indonesia's military chief, Yudo Margono, confirmed the bodies of 4 soldiers had been recovered from the area where the fighting occurred, and 5 wounded Indonesian soldiers had also been rescued from the jungle, with many still unaccounted for. Earlier in the week, the commander announced he was upgrading the operational status in Dugama to ground combat ready. The West Papua Liberation Army commander for Dugama, Egyanus Kongoya, has released multiple statements urging Wellington to intercede with Jakarta and de-escalate tensions in the region. In a statement received by RNZ Pacific this week, the West Papua Liberation Army says the Indonesian military has commenced airstrikes on their positions. They said this further increases the chances of Philip Mertens being caught in the crossfire and again appealed for Indonesia and New Zealand to respond to their request to negotiate with them for his release. Chris Hipkins says the New Zealand government's message to the hostage takers is clear and simple.
Which is that they should release the hostage, they should let him get back to his New Zealand family, who are very anxious to see him again and to know that he is okay. He should not be tied up in any political disagreement that they have.
Leaders of the political wing of the West Papua Freedom Movement have also urged the separatist fighters to release Mertens, but still blame what they describe as Indonesia's illegal occupation of their lands as the root cause of the situation. The Susi air pilot, Philip Mertens, was taken hostage in February and his aircraft torched. The rebels claim he breached a no-fly zone order they'd issued weeks before.
I've been instructed to read this statement. No foreign pilots are permitted to work and fly in Papua until Papua is independent. OPM requests the United Nations to mediate between Papua and Indonesia to work towards Papuan independence. OPM will release me after Papua is independent.
That video statement from Philip Mertens, read under duress, surrounded by armed West Papuan Liberation Army soldiers, was received by RNZ Pacific on the 10th of March. At least one more video statement has been released since, with multiple photos of Mr. Mertens surrounded by his captors, who say they've made repeated requests for Wellington and Jakarta to negotiate Mertens' release, but say they've received no response.
And let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of it coming in on the universities. Mike says, do we have too many universities? Got 8 at the moment. Wonder what would be the sweet spot, Mike. Let us know. It's disgraceful that Otago University is being slowly disemboweled. Government should start to fund the unis properly. Plenty of money for non-productive stuff, says Sandy. Gary says, how many students are encouraged into trades instead of going to university? And this person says we need to connect up the problems of underfunded universities and workforce shortages. Universities should be overfunded to provide the training in areas of shortage, such as health workers. Same approach needs to apply for polytechs for trades training. Craig from Auckland has got in touch and says, our family has 3 graduates that have left university in recent years. None of them have jobs. Maybe students don't want to pay for a degree anymore when they're not going to get a job. This person says, is it possible to turn it into a medical training site? Would they be able to train foreign students and have their degrees recognised overseas? Others are questioning the management of Otago University. This is all rubbish and due to bad management from the leadership group.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. The Prime Minister expects significant progress will be made on the rights of New Zealanders in Australia this weekend. Chris Hipkins flies to Brisbane tomorrow with a business delegation and is hoping a pathway to citizenship will be announced. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
Since 2001, New Zealanders in Australia have been on a special category visa, with pathways to citizenship difficult and leaving them unable to access benefits, student loans or even vote. That's despite Australians in New Zealand getting permanent residency on entry and a clear path to citizenship. The Prime Minister says it's left New Zealanders living across the Tasman in a state of suspended temporariness. The advocacy group AusKiwi says a change would be the biggest improvement to Trans-Tasman relations for 22 years.
The government will bring in a law to stop the courts being used as a tool for abuse in family court matters. It's promising changes to the justice system to give victims of sexual assault more rights and support and prevent litigation abuse in the family court. Justice Minister Kiri Allan says the family court is no place for vexatious litigation and judges need the power to stop it.
I am very confident that the amendments we're making today will have a significant positive impact for those people that have been involved in family litigation proceedings where they've been turned into a football, an abusive cycle football.
Kiri Allan says she knows of one case where a person brought more than 100 applications against their ex-partner over a 7-year period. Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces say they've agreed to a 3-day pause in their fight against the Sudanese army. At least 300 people have died in several days of conflict. The forces say they're halting the fighting on humanitarian grounds. The BBC's Call Kildan Yibbit Tao has more.
There have been pushes throughout the day from various members of the international community, from the UN, from the African Union, and even from the US for a 3-day ceasefire on the grounds of the Muslim holiday Eid al-Fitr. And now we're hearing that the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Force, released a statement saying that they have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire starting at 6 a.m. local time. We haven't heard from the army so far, but if they are going to agree to this ceasefire, that's going to be a relief.
Back home, a University of Otago student says a proposal to make several hundred staff redundant is daunting. The university revealed the plan yesterday, saying it's facing a $60 million budget shortfall and it's worse off than it predicted. The university has assured students they'll be able to finish the qualification and papers they're currently enrolled in. Second-year law student Charlie says she isn't sure that will work if lots of staff are made redundant.
If I was studying more of a niche degree, I 100% would feel unstable. And whether if I have been reassured that I can finish my degree, is there like an expiry date on the staff that I'm interacting with? Or am I getting kind of temporary staff that like maybe aren't as experts in their field as they should be?
An all-staff forum will be held in about 6 weeks to discuss the next steps. The Labour MP Kitty Allen says all donations she's received have been accurately reported as required by the Electoral Act. It's been revealed the Race Relations Commissioner Meng Foon and his wife donated $1,500 to the East Coast MP in the lead-up to the 2020 election. The couple also provided a rent subsidy on campaign office space worth more than $9,000. Ms Allen says no parliamentary funds were used in the office as it was not an electorate office. She says she has also updated her conflict of interest information to provide absolute transparency. The ACT Party is calling on Mr Foon to be sacked, saying his role should be politically impartial. Twitter has dropped the various labels under publicly funded media outlets after backlash in recent weeks. Media outlets such as the BBC, Canada's CBC, Australia's ABC and even RNZ had tags added to their profiles, either stating they were government-funded or state-affiliated. CBC, as well as US outlets NPR and PBS, paused activity on the social media platform, stating the labels alluded to questionable editorial independence. In some cases, Twitter doubled down, amending the BBC to publicly funded instead. This afternoon, the labels have disappeared off all outlets' profiles. Twitter owner Elon Musk has yet to make a statement, but the site's page for the labelling policy has now been taken down. And heavy rain is forecast for the central and western parts of the country overnight. The strongest fall are expected in Kapiti Coast and Horowhenua, which could get up to 100 millimetres of rain through to midday tomorrow. Half as much again could fall in Tararua Ranges. Further north, as much as 200 millimetres could come down on Mount Taranaki tonight, with thunderstorms possible. The Tasman area northwest of Motueka could also get heavy falls, and rain is generally expected from Taranaki south through to the Wellington region to Nelson, Tasman and the West Coast today and tomorrow. That's the news.
This week on Music 101, it's International Record Store Day. We'll check in with your local store and find out the best releases to get your hands on. We are behind the scenes at the Take Music Awards.
It's just a cigarette and it's just a memory light.
And Princess Chelsea's our guest on the mixtape, playing the songs that influenced her Take Music Prize winning album. Music 101, this Saturday with me, Charlotte Ryan, from 1pm here on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National, on air, online and on demand. Back to Lisa Owen and Checkpoint in a moment, but right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. In the north and west, from Northland to Wellington, including the central high country, periods of rain with a few heavy falls. Thunderstorms possible tomorrow morning before easing to a few showers in the afternoon. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional showers turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain at times from tonight, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nelson and Marlborough, rain with possible heavy falls, becoming fine tomorrow, but isolated showers remain about the ranges. For Bulla, Westland and Canterbury, rain with heavy falls, easing to isolated showers overnight, then becoming fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods with a few showers developing about Fiordland and the south coast this evening, then spreading inland for a time tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with rain developing late tomorrow morning. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Prime Minister expects a major change in immigration rules for New Zealanders living across the Tasman as he leads a business delegation to Australia ahead of Anzac Day. Chris Hipkins flies to Brisbane tomorrow mainly to talk business and trade, but anticipating a pathway to citizenship for Kiwis will be the big headline treat. 500,000 New Zealanders currently live in Australia. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
The relationship between Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison was, to put it mildly, frosty. Stalemates over Australia's 501 deportation law had caused a rift in the trans-Tasman relationship.
Send back Kiwis, genuine Kiwis. Do not deport your people and your problems.
In our government's view, that is not in Australia's national interest.
In contrast, when Ms Ardern visited Sydney last year, there were hugs and record swaps with Anthony Albanese. Much was made of a reset in the relationship, one based on friendship and common sense. Her successor, Chris Hipkins, jets off to Brisbane tomorrow for the next step in boosting that relationship.
I'd never say that there aren't opportunities for us to continue to improve the relationship, but actually the relationship is in very good heart, it's in good shape.
The trip is to mark Anzac Day and to celebrate 40 years of the Closer Economic Relations Agreement. And it's expected Mr Albanese will announce something to bring Australia and New Zealand even closer. Some reciprocity.
I'm pleased that we appear to be, on the eve of making some significant progress.
Currently, Australians living in New Zealand can apply for citizenship if they've lived here for 5 years, including 8 months of each of those 5 years, and pass character and basic language tests. New Zealanders in Australia, while they can stay indefinitely, do not have such a pathway. Applying for citizenship is difficult and expensive, and it means they miss out on things like job seeker support, student loans and disability payments, even the right to vote, despite paying taxes.
They are in this kind of state of suspended temporariness, so they're permanently temporary in Australia. That's not something that Australians find when they come to New Zealand.
Joanne Cox from advocacy group Oz Kiwi frequently met with Australian Labor MPs when they were in opposition and now as ministers. She says many Australians simply aren't aware of how damaging the policy has been.
This should be the biggest change in the trans-Tasman relations in at least 22 years. A little bit of a reset, bringing back some of the reciprocity that's been sadly missing.
National leader Christopher Luxon is concerned the move may kick off a brain drain.
There's a lot of New Zealanders already leaving New Zealand because they don't think it's a place of sufficient opportunity. And we need this to be a country where, yes, go away as part of your rite of passage of going overseas and experiencing another place, but we want people to come back here to start a business, to raise their family, to do something cool in the community.
But Chris Hipkins believes it's possible to keep people here while looking after New Zealanders overseas.
We want to make New Zealand as attractive a place as possible for people to live, work, raise their family, so that Kiwis will stay here and so that Kiwis who are currently living abroad will feel enticed to come home. That said, we're always, as a government, looking to make sure that we're protecting and defending the rights of New Zealanders wherever they are in the world and for whatever reason they might be there.
Mr Hipkins and Mr Albanese are also expected to discuss geopolitical issues like the war in Ukraine and attend a ceremony marking Anzac Day. But Mr Hipkins does not expect AUKUS and the potential for New Zealand to participate in the non-nuclear parts of it to play a big part in proceedings.
Local communities around Christchurch's port are calling for urgent action to slow the spread of huge sea worms. In some cases, Mediterranean fan worms have grown to more than 1/2 metre long. Populations in Whakaropō, Lyttelton Harbour, have increased in recent years, hitching rides on boats and encroaching on native species. Neva Chittick reports.
John Cottier is the Program Manager for Kaimahi for Nature and Rapaki Tangata Tiaki. He says Whakaropō, Lyttelton Harbour, has been feeding communities for a long time, but that's at risk now.
People are just totally unaware of what's going on under the water. And I can tell you now it's catastrophic. We talk about stories of when we were young and the fish we used to take out of here, and it sustained us. I mean, crayfish was a weekly occurrence on our tables. We struggled to get 5 flounders here when the days when I was a child, there were 60 or 70 in one drag.
One of the main reasons behind the decline is the Mediterranean fanworms, or sabella. The marine tube worms have no predators in Aotearoa. They grow on hard surfaces in huge clumps, sometimes up to 1,000 per square metre. Canterbury Regional Council's Biosecurity Manager, Carl Diamond, says the worms were first detected in Littleton Port in 2008. But earlier this year, they spread further into the harbour.
We found that it had spread to Corsair and Cass Bay. We've found it on 4 vessels. Those fanworms that we have found, we have removed. At the moment, we've got a tender out for a delimiting survey.
Until the survey is done, it's not known how many worms are lurking in the depths under boats or wharves. But Littleton Port Company has removed nearly 1,000 since 2021. John Walsh, Biosecurity New Zealand's Director of Response and Readiness, says the worms have been eradicated from other parts of the motu.
Tutukaka Marina in Northland, for example, we've had no detections there in 5 years after a local elimination effort, and we think it's gone. Picton and Waikawa marinas in the Marlborough Sounds, we've had good cracks at it and not been able to find any there for 2 years.
But he says the density of the worms in Whakaraupo makes eradication there difficult. Ngāti Wheke and Naval Point Yacht Club say urgent action is needed. Club Board Chair Colin Locke thinks a clean hull policy would make a big difference.
You need to have the facility, and 2, some regulation around minimum cycles of, say, every 2 years. So, by way of example, I have to provide an insurance certificate to be in Te Ana Marina. Why shouldn't I have to have proof of a clean hull?
John Walsh says it's one of the options on the table.
There's a good clean hull program going at the top of the North Island and top of the South Island. We're just getting up and running a national behaviour change program, encouraging boaties, yachties to understand the risk of biofouling and to do something about it.
All agree it will take everyone changing their ways to release whakaraupo from the Mediterranean worm's stranglehold.
Those are some creepy worms. Check out the video. It'll be on our webpage. 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Elon Musk's gigantic new rocket Starship exploded on its maiden flight, but the billionaire is still hailing the outcome as a success. No one was hurt in the test launch by SpaceX, and Musk says his company will try again in a few months. The ABC's Jade McMillan reports.
The highly anticipated launch of the largest and most powerful rocket ever built.
What a sight when the ground cameras exploded!
SpaceX's Starship lifted off from southern Texas, clearing the launch pad. But the booster failed to separate, and Starship soon began to tumble. SpaceX's John Innsbrucker and Kate Tice were providing commentary on a live stream.
Yeah, Kate, right now it looks like we saw the start of the flip, but obviously we're seeing from the ground cameras the entire Starship stack continuing to rotate. We should have had separation by now. Obviously, this is does not appear to be a nominal situation.
Yeah, it does appear to be spinning, but I do want to remind everyone that everything after clearing the tower was icing on the cake.
Roughly 4 minutes after liftoff, it exploded high above the Gulf of Mexico. The ultimate goal had been to send Starship into space on a 90-minute-long journey. But SpaceX had played down expectations of success ahead of the launch. And former astronaut Katie Coleman says getting the rocket off the ground is still a major milestone, as the company plans to take humans back to the moon in partnership with NASA and eventually to Mars.
I know it's hard to see something disappear before your eyes on the screen and think that it was successful, but what NASA and SpaceX are doing together is such a very difficult project.
SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has congratulated his team, saying a lot has been learned ahead of the next test launch in a few months' time. While NASA Administrator Bill Nelson has tweeted that every great achievement throughout history has demanded some level of calculated risk. Katie Coleman believes the dream of space travel for regular people just got a step closer.
As people, as humans, we are meant to explore. We will always be going. And this time, I feel like, for the first time, we're really going together. People all over the world joining together to get closer to get to the moon, to go on to Mars, and to become that interplanetary species. They are definitely going to do that. I'm just hoping I can find a way to hitch a ride.
Another day in the US, another senseless shooting. A man in North Carolina who's accused of shooting a 6-year-old and her parents after a basketball rolled into his yard has turned himself into the police after a brief manhunt. The shots were fired after the man yelled at the kids who went to retrieve the ball. CNN's Diane Gallagher has this report.
Why did you shoot my daddy and me?
An incomprehensible question from a 6-year-old. Kensley White, stitches in her cheek from where doctors had to remove bullet fragments, was just riding her bike while other kids played basketball when gunshots rang out in her North Carolina neighborhood.
It was rapid. As he was running across his yard, he had his arm outstretched and he was like, pow, 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 pow.
Witnesses say when a basketball rolled into Robert Singletary's yard, he began yelling and cursing at the kids, which neighbors say wasn't unusual. But what happened next when the father of one of the kids playing basketball came to talk to Singletary was.
The guy was standing on his porch, and the dad that had words with him about, saying stuff to the kids, he had started walking back down the street, and he started, the shooter just started running across the yard, shooting.
That man surprisingly got away unharmed, but then neighbors say that Singletary started walking in the direction of the other kids and parents on the street and began shooting.
He started shooting with my daughter standing right there beside of him and several other kids around them.
Kensley's father ran to protect his daughter.
He looked at my husband dead in the face and he said, "I'm gonna kill you."
Kinsley and her father were both shot while trying to run away. A bullet grazed Kensley's mother's arm.
She had a big fragment of a bullet in her cheek.
According to a man who lived at the same house, Singletary's girlfriend rented a room there, and the 24-year-old suspect began staying with her a few weeks ago.
I don't have too much interaction with him. I had no idea anything like this was going to go on.
Neighbors said Singletary was often yelling at kids about playing in the yard.
He acted like he just hated children.
According to police, Singletary was arrested on assault and kidnapping charges in December, accused of hitting a girlfriend in the head with a mini sledgehammer. He has not entered a plea. CNN has contacted his attorney. Gaston County's police chief put out a statement letting the people of Gaston County know this sort of violence will not stand.
They let all the kids sign it.
This incident on the heels of a week already plagued by several gun violence tragedies, leaving a community in utter fear.
It's very scary. Very scary.
Actor Alec Baldwin is likely to have his remaining manslaughter charges dropped. Helena Hutchins was struck and killed by a live round of ammunition fired from a prop gun held by Baldwin. Prosecutors had already dropped a firearm charge against him, reducing a potential prison sentence from 5 years to a maximum of 18 months. CNN's Chloe Malas reports.
So my only question is, am I being charged with something?
Alec Baldwin, soon to be no longer accused, at least for now, after New Mexico prosecutors plan to file a motion dismissing involuntary manslaughter charges against the actor, a move they call, quote, temporary, pending further investigation. That's according to Baldwin's attorneys, who said, quote, "We are pleased with the decision to dismiss the case against Alec Baldwin."
You were in the room when someone was holding the gun, yeah.
Okay. Baldwin admitted to holding the gun that fired a bullet, killing Helena Hutchins, the cinematographer on Baldwin's film Rust, but told police he did not know he was handed a loaded gun. Baldwin resumes filming on Rust this week, with production moved to Montana. This was Baldwin last year.
Someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
The dismissal would be a win for Baldwin's legal team, which challenged the motives and politics of one of the original prosecutors.
It doesn't matter if he's a liberal Democrat and I'm a conservative Republican. My job's always been to prosecute crimes.
In February, Baldwin's lawyers filed a motion to remove Special Prosecutor Andrea Reeb, who at the time of the investigation was running for state representative in New Mexico. In an email later revealed in the New York Times, Reeb suggested being involved in the case, quote, might help in my campaign. Both Reeb and the district attorney who hired her ultimately recused themselves. Their replacements dropped the charges against Baldwin. His attorneys also saying today, quote, they encourage a proper investigation into the facts and circumstances of this tragic accident.
Is there live ammo that's kept on set? No, never.
The film's weapons handler, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, is now the sole defendant in the case, facing 18 months for involuntary manslaughter. Her attorney says she will plead not guilty and that Gutierrez-Reed, quote, has been emotional about the tragedy but has committed no crime.
Are we really supposed to feel bad about you, Mr. Baldwin?
Helena Hutchins' husband has been a vocal critic of Baldwin, saying he should face charges.
The idea that the person holding the gun, causing it to discharge, is not responsible is absurd to me.
But now, justice for Helena Hutchins moves forward without a star defendant.
And she was great at her job, and she died. And that hurts me every day.
The cost of living is rising all over the world, and the US is no exception. Many families there are now struggling to afford care for their elderly relatives. CNN's Elizabeth Cohen has this report on one family doing it tough.
That's all of us when we were little. That's me, that's Peter, that's you.
Ada LaBarbera will be 90 years old next week, and she's lived a great life. Originally from Puerto Rico, she met her husband, Peter, an accountant in New York City. They were married for 49 years. She was a teacher, had 2 children and 2 grandchildren. And now Ada has dementia and is often confused.
I have a great person over here. This is my mother, and she is the best.
But this is her daughter, Tammy LaBarbera.
Ready? Your favorite.
Thank you. This is my favorite.
It's an honor to take care of my mother.
Good job.
But like many Americans, Tammy needs help, and she can't afford it.
My mom needs somebody 24 hours a day. Yummy, yummy, and the tummy.
She says Medicare pays for someone to come to the house, but only one day every other week for just 40 minutes.
Oh my God.
And Tammy's son helps too. But Tammy has had to quit her job to care for her mother full time.
And I'm not asking for a lot, just a few hours a week, just someone I can go to the grocery store, or just have a little break for myself.
But even just a few hours is way too expensive. Where Tammy and Ada live in Murrieta, California, 1 hour with a home health care aide is $137. And residential care for Ada is even more out of the question. $4,000 a month for assisted living, and the national average for a memory care unit, nearly $7,000 a month.
We don't have that kind of money. She deserves to be well taken care of. And we get the door shut on us. There's nowhere for her to go.
80% of U.S. households with older adults are struggling financially today or at risk of falling into economic insecurity.
We're care workers and we're drowning and we don't have help.
Let me think, because
she and her mother have only her mother's Social Security and pension, just a few $1,000s a month, so Tammy is burning through her savings. Ada is left with her memories.
That's my wonderful husband. Look at how good looking that guy is.
She cared for her husband and her son through cancer before they both passed away. And Tammy is left with dread.
I love to find solutions to problems, and I can't find a solution to this problem.
A very American problem, how to afford care for the people who once took care of us.
Windsurfing is a high-intensity water sport. You need to be strong to stay on the board. But it's not just for the young. An 88-year-old Polish man has been windsurfing since the first boards were made. Now he's taking his way towards the Guinness Book of World Records. The BBC's Stephanie Prentice has more.
That's the sound of Piotr Dudek heading out from a harbour in Poland, using his body to control a large sail being whipped around by the wind. This is one of the 2 weekly trips the retired grandfather needs for him to go for the Guinness World Record for windsurfing, something he says he's determined to get this spring. But it won't be easy.
The biggest challenge is to learn how to control the element, nature, because it's about embracing the wind, the water, the wobbly board. And when you put it all together, you have a lot of fun.
Though aging may make windsurfing harder, Piotr says the sport has become easier.
The first gear was very primitive, very heavy boards. 2 people needed to carry it onto water, and the boom was attached to the mast with a string. There were no patents, like nowadays, for example, or latches.
Despite the gear improving, Piotr now only goes out at a level 3 Beaufort or wind scale instead of the 5 he was used to when he first started out. On top of that, he's passing his skills on to a new generation, teaching a large group of Polish students how to master the sport and maybe one day get the world record after him.
And finally tonight, flying isn't the most comfortable experience for most of us, and especially for little humans. Babies let out their frustrations the only way they know how, screaming. While in the US, one slightly older passenger got fed up with a crying infant and has his own epic meltdown. Brace, brace, brace. CNN's Jenny Moose reports.
It's bad enough on the ground.
We could keep that down a little bit.
You can get the baby out of here.
But up in the air, it can turn a grown man into a crybaby.
We are in a tin can with a baby in a echo chamber.
It was a total meltdown when told to lower his voice.
Lower that baby's voice.
The passenger shooting the video, Mark Grabowski, couldn't stifle a smile.
I paid for a ticket too. Have a comfortable flight.
The Southwest flight from Baltimore to Fort Lauderdale was circling due to bad weather. Mark says the baby had been crying for about half an hour when the unidentified passenger blew up. So were people on the plane with him or against him?
Everyone was pretty much against him.
Online commenters split. The only baby on that flight is the grown adult having a petulant meltdown versus bro said the quiet part out loud. Very loud, what a flight attendant said.
Because you're yelling. So is the baby!
The woman traveling with the ranting passenger put her head in her hand. The crying baby was distanced from the irate guy.
They took him to the front and people gave up their seats.
The plane was diverted to Orlando.
They put cuffs on that kid. I'm good with going to jail.
Orlando police told CNN he was not arrested. Southwest said, "We appreciate the patience of our other customers on board who had to experience such unacceptable behavior." The rant felt familiar to one poster. I can see Samuel L. Jackson saying those lines.
You're yelling. So is the baby!
Keep it together, people, this weekend. Ka kite.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Universities New Zealand Executive Director Chris Whelan says at least 5 of the country's 8 universities are struggling due to a big drop in domestic enrolments and a lack of government funding. 7 New Zealanders are registered as being in Sudan, where fighting between 2 previously allied leaders has left hundreds dead. Canadian police are investigating a gold heist of around $24 million from a cargo site at Toronto's International Airport. And Auckland's State Highway 20 Southwest